Good evening. As always, you have been waiting for your favorite program with the University and You every third Thursday of the month. Yes, we may have had a recorded program in August because we took a break, our summer break, deserved break. And now we are back today, being the third Thursday in September, and I know you were looking forward to it. I should say to you, we have a very special guest. And it may also come as a surprise to you that he will be appearing in two places at the same time. So while he speaks on television, Channel 5 mapping with you, he'll be delivering a lecture. The purpose why he's here in Dominica, he will be delivering a lecture at the same time. So you'll get, you may say, stereo effect, simultaneous effect of television and radio broadcast live on Kyrie FM. And his name is Professor Errol R. And I should have put Sir before that. Professor Sir Errol R. Waldron from Barbados and an affiliate, very solid one, of the University of the West Indies. And he will introduce himself when we return. Let's have a word with our sponsors.
I'm part of a tough, smart,
constantly evolving,
never too old to learn community of human beings.
proud of country,
Proudly Caribbean, global citizens.
with convenient access to over 400 learning programs
Delivered both online and face-to-face.
from the Caribbean's University of First Choice.
My mind,
My life.
my world of possibilities is wide open.
Call, click, or visit the UWI Open Campus.
Yes, good evening. And here we have with us Professor Sir Errol R. Waldron from Barbados. And what better way to welcome him to the University and You program by asking him to introduce himself. Tell us everything that we need to know about you, Professor.
That would take up the whole program, I imagine. But as first of all, I'm delighted to be here. Dominica has always been one of my favorite islands. I haven't always been inspired by your beautiful mountains because I come from the flatlands of Barbados. I'm Professor Emeritus of Surgery in the University of the West Indies. I've been officially retired for the last 11 years. And I've had the privilege of working with and training a number of the doctors who work here in Dominica. The purpose for the visit was this lecture I'm going to give this evening, and I'm just interested to hear that I'm going to appear in two different places at once. I don't know if that's the magic of Dominica.
Yes.
In the question of the ethics,
yes.
Sorry, you were going to.
Well, you will continue.
No, and the question of ethics has concerned me for some time because in my career as professor, also as dean of the university, we've heard complaints from time to time that these young doctors, they always say, they never mention the old ones, are not acting as ethically as they should. And I realized that the young doctors were just as idealistic as others before. And I realized that there was a disconnect between what was professional conduct and what the community thought it should be.
Yes.
And therefore I felt that we needed to look at the methods of training in ethics, and this is one of the things I will tackle.
Great. But before he goes or delve into this topic, professional ethics, a community, and professional responsibility, I need, as he said, one of his favorite islands, to sort of tie him in with Dominica, to say to you that in conversation with him prior to this program, he did inform me that Dr. Carissa Etienne, which all Dominicans and the whole Caribbean is celebrating now as head of PAO, it is, and Dr. Carissa Etienne was one of his students, as well as Dr. Paul and several others. But can you recall anything of note of Carissa Etienne when you taught her?
Always very cheerful.
Good.
Beautiful smile. And she always had the ability to disarm anyone who if she was in a group, be able to disarm them with her smile and to get her way.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So that is it. How he describes Carissa: very cheerful, always smiling. I don't know what he says about Hendrix Paul, who is our surgeon here. Who, if Carissa smiles, Hendrik Paul laughs. That's what I can say about him.
A much more reserved character.
Much more reserved character, but can have a very good laugh when he has to. But let me ask you, did you know Bernard Sorrento? Did you meet with him?
I met Bernard Sorrento when I made several visits for various reasons to the island in the 70s.
Yes.
And I realized at that time that although we were in separate universities, we were training at about the same time.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so you are familiar with the person in whom the honor is being given. That is, Bernard Sorrento, I should say to you, was the first graduate from the University of the West Indies coming from Dominica.
Yeah.
At that time, in 1948, I think it started as the London School of Tropical Medicine in Jamaica.
No, actually it was called the University College.
University College, yes. And Bernard, I think, attended the university in the very early days and was a very bright scholar who came from Dominica and made Dominica his home throughout his life. He may have visited other territories in the Caribbean, but never ventured to places like Britain and the United States and settled there. He served his people well. So for this, we are honoring him, not only as an alumnus and very distinguished one in Dominica, but one who served the community well, and in addition, the region. So this being the 5th annual Bernard A. Sorrento Distinguished Lecture, and should I say, you are very honored to be in that capacity, delivering the 5th lecture.
Thank you very much.
And probably many more. We may call on you.
Well, that would be very nice of you if you did. By the way, you weren't too much off the mark when you talk about the School of Agriculture. That was the place where the St. Augustine campus
was formed.
Yes. Was formed.
Yes. Okay.
In Trinidad. When I met Bernie, he was already a legend.
Yes.
In Dominica. And he was one of the many isolated specialists serving people in the islands in the Caribbean. And if you traveled up and down the Caribbean, you would find these persons who, after undergoing their basic training, went on to do specialties which had not been served before in their islands, and they all stayed and made sterling contributions to the people in the countries where they were.
Yes, and Bernard Sorrento was a gynecologist.
Yes.
And I've heard some of the persons who worked with him, younger ones, always made mention that Bernard wasn't one who went by the book, per se, regimented. He was very innovative, but was very knowledgeable in gynecology and could pass on a lot of his experiences to the younger doctors.
Yes. Well, one of the things that you found if you went up and down the Caribbean is that if a doctor is going to serve their patients as well as they could, they had to be innovative.
Yes.
Because quite often, apart from the fact that they were by themselves, sometimes they were lacking in equipment, and sometimes they had to improvise, but always the characteristic of these persons like Bernie was they were going to work as hard as possible, and they were going to try within all the knowledge and limits that they had to do the best they could for every individual and for the community as a whole.
Well, I'm happy, Professor, that you use those terms, because it leads very much into what you are here for, the purpose of being here, to deliver this 5th lecture, distinguished lecture, Bernard A. Sorendo's annual lecture. I should quickly say that the University of the West Indies Open Campus, Dominica, is working in conjunction with the Dominica Social Security. That you may say the insurance part of our lives, or national insurance, or pseudo-national insurance, or affiliated national insurance, the Dominica Social Security, our pensions and other things. So here it is. We, and particularly Professor Waldron, will be talking about ethics. Let me attempt to define ethics before we ask him to give not his version of ethics, but what he needs to tell us about ethical behavior, or be that way, not necessarily only in medicine, but in any profession in life. Ethics, as I think I understand it, is a branch of philosophy which seeks to address questions about morality, how moral values should be determined, how moral outcome can be achieved in specific situations, be it medical, social, sporting, religious, political, legal, business, you name it, and what moral values people actually abide by. I hope I'm on the right track.
Yes, you are on the right track, and that's what one will see of a definition of ethics as you look it up. But one of the things that then flows from that is morals, and where do we get these morals from? And generally, I think if you ask 9 out of 10 people in any community, they will say, well, that comes from religion. But then if you ask them, well, tell me, how do I blend the morals or the values of the various religions in the world, and particularly in our societies today, where we avow to religious freedom, and where we have communities now which are much less homogeneous than there were in the past, where we are going to have within our communities people of many faiths. Some of them we think are a little bit on the fringe, others are mainstream, but they do have particular issues that affect medicine or law, politics. They have sometimes some very different views, which they couch in moral terms. But we as a community and the professionals who serve that community have really to blend that into a code of conduct that serves all of the people, because we cannot put people outside and say, well, look, you belong to that religion, so I can't treat you or exercise my ethical values. We have to deal with everyone.
Everyone. Okay, so what in essence I'm getting here, you made mention of something like code of ethics or code of conduct, as you mentioned. So ethics really relates to behavior, and how we as human beings, what principles, what values we uphold, probably for orderliness or just to make a society work. That is, we have to live by certain rules, certain codes that will govern our behavior.
And so we don't, in fact, become a totally anarchistic society in which we are turning on each other. We develop rules of conduct that we can, the professions can serve the community, and we can have orderly conduct and a framework for dealing with areas which are disputed.
Okay.
And that's very important, because today I think there are a number of communities who feel that they do not have a proper pathway to address issues they have with people like doctors, lawyers, the police, and of course even the politicians,
yes.
and certainly the priests.
Okay.
People, if you say, well, had a problem with a priest, the first thing they want to do is, well, we better not talk too loud about that.
So are you saying now, to address those problems that may occur in any profession,
yes,
in any form or work of life, we need to have some standards, but those standards have to be value-based. What do people value?
They have to be value-based, and one has to remember that in most societies, things are changing. And today, they're changing a lot more quickly than they did centuries ago.
Okay.
If we looked at the example of medicine, quite often you hear about the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes.
That was a 4th century formulation. And I always remember my students that Hippocrates swore to 5 different gods. Matter of fact, some of the gods he swore to, the names of the gods have been perpetuated in the language of medicine. For instance, one of the gods was the god of Hygeia. So you have that. But it had to change as the society changes. One could say even as our gods change. But, you know, because we live in a society now where I will have to deal with Christians and the multitude of Christian sects, to deal with Muslims, to deal with Hindus. Just as a starter.
Yeah, of 3. And these are very large groupings.
That's very
Yes,
large groupings.
yes.
And they do have very different views of things related to some aspects of medicine, but certainly other aspects of the conduct of the society, how we should conduct ourselves as societies. And these have to be taken into account.
Okay, so what we are observing here is that any organization, any group, any number of people, be it religious sect or communities you may come down to, would be the standards that they set and the values that they uphold. Then if a problem arises if, say, the red line is crossed, and hence we need to have some guiding principles, rules, or what have you, to shape behavior so that it doesn't infringe or be exclusive to one group and violating another group.
That's right. And not only does one have to try to formulate those rules of conduct, you have to have mechanisms, credible mechanisms, for enforcing them when there are complaints of breaches. And then there also has to be mechanisms for them to be reviewed and to be changed when necessary, because there is no way that, for instance, we could conduct ourselves exactly in the way that Hippocrates did. But some of the principles he enunciated are still with us. One of the things, for instance, that I think is important in many of the professions we mentioned earlier on there are two things in that Hippocratic Oath that struck me when I reread it. One was confidentiality, and the other was justice. And it is very interesting when you say justice to a person, they first think of the courts. And as one prime minister, I think he was perhaps saying it in jest, and he said, if you wanted justice, you don't go to the courts. And I think, although that may sound...
Meaning that you don't find justice in the court?
Well, I think that is what he was implying.
Yes.
But I think that we need to look at justice in a different way, in that how does it serve the community and each individual as a whole. Now, in medicine, for instance, I see justice as each individual in the community being able to access medical services, the best medical services that the country can provide, and that there should be no distinction as to whether they can pay for the service. I mean, you know, are you a rich man and therefore you can get this? Whether what social status you come from, what religion you practice. All of those attributes which are everyone in the community should be able to access that. That is justice in that sense.
Well, I do not know if I'll be fair to say, it almost sounds like Professor Waldron may be advising Barack Obama. But we will find that out later. I need, however, to ask you, because I know some of my medical friends, people who either attended school with me at the Dominica Grammar School many years ago, or those who have gone on to do medicine later. There are a few of them who hold dearly to an African named Imhotep. Are you familiar with that name?
Yes, of course.
Because you make mention very often of the Hippocratic Oath, and never did you mention Imhotep. Are you familiar with that name? Because he is deemed, according to African history, as the real father of medicine.
Yes, I mentioned the Hippocratic Oath, of course, because the Greeks, because that is the one that people are familiar with, that has been
documented
and has been documented and projected down. But Imhotep, for those who have been students of African history, they will point out that as a physician, he preceded Hippocrates in the 4th century. But that brings me to the point about these traditions and the Hippocratic Oath. Now, obviously, the Hippocratic Oath came down in the European tradition because they say history is written by the victors.
Yes, and the vanquished do not have a chance to.
But it remained stagnant and sterile. And in fact, I would say that it did so up until the Second World War, where, in a sense, the Europeans tore themselves and the world apart. But one of the things that came out, and again, the victors write the history, one of the things that came out was related to the war crimes committed. And war crimes were committed by Nazi doctors in terms of experimentation on human beings and so on. And it was in the wake of the Nuremberg trials at the end of the Second World War that a major revision of what does it mean to practice medicine was made. And it was made by the World Medical Association. And it was couched as an oath of fidelity. And they took a number of the principles from the Hippocratic Oath, but in fact try to modernize the conduct, how doctors should conduct themselves and how it should relate to the communities and the people they serve. And that was after 4 centuries of adhering to a code, a sort of dramatic change brought about by horrific events in the Second World War. Mm-hmm. But things were changing, all right? It's just that event. Mm-hmm. Yes. So what we have to do actually is to ensure that changes can occur, but at the same time do not sort of violate what basic principles there were. And one of the things that will challenge modern societies today, and which Hippocrates and the Oath of Fidelity kept to, was this question of confidentiality.
Confidentiality.
Now, confidentiality
between the doctor and his patient. Yes. Okay. Between the lawyer and his client.
Absolutely.
Okay. Between the priest and
his
confession in a church. Yes.
All right.
That has to be maintained. But I just want you to probably elaborate a little more on what you are saying governs every organization, any professional grouping, etc. That is, you made mention of the code of ethics, and that is based on basic principles of dignity, I would think, mm-hmm. integrity, resources may have a part to play in there, and the relationship of partners within, well, not only within, but outside that organization, the relationship of you with your patients, the relationship of a lawyer with his clients, etc., etc. So I'm saying these basic principles of which usually get enshrined into a code of ethics. Can you just elaborate on those?
No.
The question of dignity, let's start with.
For instance, some of these principles will change to some extent between the professions. Now, in medicine, we have 4 what I would call basic principles. The first one sounds very obvious, is that you should try and do good.
Try and do good.
All right.
Or the right thing.
And yes,
because good may be relative.
That's right. The next one may sound like if it's the same thing, but it is important as do no harm.
Yes.
Because when we seek to do good, and when we prescribe a medicine, when we do an operation,
yes.
We are intending to do good, mm-hmm. but we may do harm.
In the process of doing good.
Of doing good.
Yes, yes.
And in that interface is a very important principle, because you then have to establish standards mm-hmm. in that interface.
Yes.
And as technology and so on emerge, those standards are going to be reshaped. The third principle is autonomy. And this is where I would say the question of dignity comes in. Because what does autonomy mean? It means really that you have the right, and it's enshrined in many constitutions, you have the right to decide what is going to be done with your body. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what you're going to allow somebody to do, and also the professional has the right to say what he can do. In other words, you have the right to say, look, this service or this surgery you want to do on me, I agree to it.
Yes.
But I, as a surgeon, also have the right to say, you can't tell me what surgery I should do for you, because I think this may be against my professional
Ethics.
Ethics and,
yes,
or even my professional capability.
Jeez, yeah,
so we both have
expertise.
rights.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this was, in fact, a big change for medicine, because when we came out of that Second World War and they changed, autonomy didn't come into it at first, because we all had the idea the doctor knew best.
Yes.
And we will do what is best for you. But we've had to come through and develop the concept of informed consent. One of the things I remember at medical school, we were taught to deceive patients sometimes, for their own good, of course.
That's the placebo effect, is that what they call it?
Yeah, we didn't talk to them about having cancer, because, you know, that may frighten them. And so on. And in those days, we had very few tools to deal with some cancers. Nowadays, our code of informed consent, which is not only an ethical but a legal construct, means that we have to speak the truth so that you understand exactly what is going on, so that then you can make an informed decision about what we are going to do for you. And this involves an interchange at a level with a patient, which we as professionals must respect the dignity of the patient.
We will go deeper into this. Let us probably take a break for our sponsors. Who else? The University of the West Indies.
I'm part of a tough, smart,
Constantly evolving,
never too old to learn community of human beings.
proud of country,
Proudly Caribbean, global citizens.
with convenient access to over 400 learning programs
Delivered both online and face-to-face.
from the Caribbean's University of First Choice.
My mind,
My life.
my world of possibilities is wide open.
Call, click, or visit the UWI Open Campus.
So, we were getting into deeply, you may say, ethical issues, where there was an interplay between the rights of, say, let's talk about medicine, ethics in medicine, the rights of the patient and the rights of the doctor. And the doctor here has one very important tool, his expertise, but a decision has to be made. I have been, while listening to Professor Waldron, been twinkling to ask about euthanasia, because I know many of you would be interested in that. What is his view about euthanasia? Because that's where the problem arises, the ethical problems, the expertise of doctors, their knowledge, and the rights of patients. Can you tell us your views on euthanasia? Is there a place? Because we're now talking of a modern society where people never thought of those things. There was suicide from the time man was created, but now it is much more talked about. Should I have the right to determine when my life ends? Or should it be in the hands of the doctors?
Yeah. This is a good example of how things change throughout time. And how we talked about professional ethics and the community, how they have to blend better. But when you come to a consensus, that has to be enshrined in law. Right? And one of the things, along with abortion, euthanasia has been the most controversial of issues in medical practice over a long period of time. And it is now, at this stage, that big changes are being made in countries. And of course, this will have to be a great thing. Now, euthanasia is different from suicide in that you've taken this into your own hands.
Yes.
All right? And often the suicidal person is ill in the sense that they're ill mentally.
Mental, yes.
When we talk about euthanasia, we are talking about people who are not ill mentally, who are saying to the doctor, I wish you to help me
end my life.
Die in comfort. Because my life has come to what I consider
unbearable,
useful end.
Yes, end, yes, okay.
This useful
end, yes.
So that now, in most societies, because we have the ethic, do no harm,
yes.
anything that was done by a doctor to deliberately cause the death of a patient was unethical. But then on the other hand, you were now developing the construct of the autonomy of the patient. And here was someone saying to you, I do not, and it has some elements to other advanced directives, I do not wish to continue
to prolong
living in this
my life, yes. Yeah.
And I'm asking you as the expert to help me. Now, that has been against the law,
yes,
in most countries.
Yeah.
And now you're seeing debates going on in many countries as to how this might be accommodated. And the one place, well, there are a few places now in Europe,
yeah.
where this has. But one of the interesting ways in which the law was changed was in Netherlands. And here was a situation where some doctors were getting this request, which they thought was a justifiable request, but they weren't allowed to help the patient. So one doctor, having faced with this request, in fact consulted a colleague who agreed that it was reasonable to help this patient out. Did it and then went to the police and said, look, I've just committed
a crime.
He was arrested, he was tried, and it was a very interesting construct because he was convicted, given a suspended
self-incrimination.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the Dutch courts and the government accepted a situation in which they said, look, if you do this and you consult with another doctor and you tell us that you're going to do it, we won't prosecute you. And that situation, which I call, is like the one in the United States with don't ask, don't tell. That went on for 20 years before the Dutch government changed the law and then made it possible that it is not a crime to do this. But that's an unusual situation. And most governments and many of the communities are unable yet to face up to the issues and make and change the decision, so that in most of them it is still illegal to do it.
Can I ask that does morality in one field contradict morality in another field? Let me just explain. Say you are governed by a code of ethics in medicine, and there are codes or rules in, say, religion. Religion has a steadfast rule. Thou shalt not kill. That is a commandment of God. Are we finding ways in other professions to violate that religious dictate?
But the religions violate that commandment every day.
Tell me.
If you support an army,
yes,
and a war, if you say, look, you've insulted me, go out there and kill some people in protest. That's violating.
There were religious wars, were there not?
So,
yes.
So I am disinclined to take that commandment seriously for that point of view. But where it does bear expression, and again, like euthanasia, it's a debate in many different countries, is the whole question of abortion.
Yes.
All right? And as you know, there are some religions that have taken this to the point that they have they ban any impediment to the conception of life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. But
even if, for example, even if scientifically one may show that if these two persons were to, if someone were to conceive a baby, but you did some DNA analysis and recognize that that person most likely will develop a child with Down syndrome, what happens then?
Well, again, this is
or whose decision is it?
The decision, quite proper, in my opinion, should be between the mother and her doctor.
And the doctor. Okay.
But again, they cannot make those decisions themselves without having to take into account the law.
Yes.
And unless you are going to say, like the example I gave you about euthanasia, but let's defy the law. So that the community itself now has to debate that along with the professions as to how the law will be changed. And for many years, most countries had an absolute ban on abortion. Some of them did not even take into account if the mother was dying
yes,
because of the pregnancy.
Or if the mother, well, very common, the mother was raped.
Yes, well, that's another one, you see. What struck me about most of these bans was that the woman had no say. The woman absolutely had no say. None of her rights were considered, and in fact, what you've seen in many countries, and various countries are at different stages, is that as women have asserted their rights to a whole number of things, women have asserted their rights to be able to be
get same pay for work, yes,
and so on,
yes.
to be educated and
yes.
so on, not to be beaten,
yes,
by their men or
and I should quickly add, they themselves should not beat.
Well, of course. Well, you see, rights also come with responsibilities. So if you demand a right not to be beaten,
you should
have
not
a
end
responsibility not to beat as well.
Yes.
But as women have and they have become important groups, they have affected how communities think. I say to people, it is only a short while ago that the biggest democracy in our region gave a significant portion of their population the right to vote.
Yeah.
It was in my mother's time that women got the right to vote.
And then long after, black people got the right to vote.
Exactly.
And even now, as I'm understanding it, with the using the concept of voter ID or voter registration, which one group sees that as be that advantageous to them, because many illiterate, many people who say not aware, may not come forward to get registered.
Yes,
even if the right is there too, but they may not use it.
And that is a kind of backlash in that particular society we're talking about. That is, but it illustrates the dynamics that go on in a society and how laws will be fashioned. And this is what is happening with something like abortion in different countries.
Yes.
There has to be a dialogue. It will involve the professional groups, but it must involve the people who are most
affected by
affected.
Yes.
And that's one way it is going to be done.
So inclusion and respect. We need to respect those persons when we take decisions, ethical decisions, who it will affect. I mean, we must respect their rights.
That is an aspect of justice.
Yes.
Yes.
I just along the same lines. We spoke about euthanasia, abortion. We haven't spoken about hanging, which is a very topical thing for capital punishment in the Caribbean. We still probably, throughout the Caribbean, hold dearly that if you commit crime and very serious crimes, then you should be sent to the gallows. Whereas in many societies, and particularly Europe, compared, say, to America, Europe hold dearly to not executing people. What are your views on that?
Well, again, I think the Second World War was seminal in this, in changing views in society, where even although there was perhaps even greater personal slaughter in the First World War, it came down to the point with the extermination camps and so on, that this whole business of when we decide that somebody should be killed because we're using it this time, we're saying they committed a murder, but in that, it was whether you came from a particular ethnic group.
Yes.
Whether you had a particular disability. It wasn't, you weren't any more an enemy than you came from somewhere else.
Yes.
And persons of our hue, if you look back in history, know too well that we have been the victims of that.
Yes.
All right? And one of the things that one must realize when you look at some of these questions is that the victims of abuse almost always become the greatest abusers themselves.
Yes.
Right?
Why is that so?
It is the only thing they know.
So probably the abuse is a learned behavior.
Yes.
Okay.
And
so it's not necessarily in your DNA, but it's a learned behavior.
It's a learned behavior.
Okay.
Right.
And I think whenever we deal with customer service, there is always that thing about the behavior that you choose. Okay. So if you behave in a particular way, your customer will respond in the same way, if not that learned behavior. Although probably people may go back, many times we speak of school days. I attended the Dominica Grammar School, and you would probably have attended a similar school in Barbados.
Yes.
And you know that the cane was the order of the day that kept people in check, their behavior in check. Or parents of the past use the strap or broomstick or whatever it is to shape behavior. And people are still saying that even with those, people of your generation, probably up to mine, have behaved better than the new generations, the younger ones. If he was here, Dr. Francis Severin, I'll tell you, like his generation, they're much more spoiled, one may say, than those before.
But still, you see the learned behavior being played out in societies as we get more violent. People think they can solve disputes through violence. This is what is happening when we talk about wife beating and so on, you know. The wife who is beaten is going to take it out on the child.
And the children will take it out on theirs. Okay, that eye for an eye concept lives on. But I need now to ask Professor Waldron about medical ethics. Not that we haven't spoken about it, but I wanted to zero in on it and to ask what is being taught at medical schools now. Some of the things that he has discussed here, and are they being considered in the curriculum of training our doctors in this modern age? Are they being helped to make decisions that you may say now are much more taxing than in the past? Whereas everybody probably understood in the past, well, that is expected. The doctor, like the teacher before the doctor, you were in the village, they know it all. The savoir-faire and the savoir everything was you as a teacher. You wrote letters, you were consulted, you were the super person in a village. The doctor took that place and probably still holds that place in terms of health and well-being and even life. I always admire doctors and pilots. I'll tell you why. I on an operating table or in an office and being prescribed some medication, or I am flying from A to B, and there is the pilot who has my life in his hand, as a doctor does. And we do hold them to higher ethical or moral standards than other professions. We accept that. We say lawyers, something about lawyers, law, lying, synonymous, politicians, etc. But we do still hold dearly that doctors and I would say some other professions, but particularly medical professions, they are held to a very high moral standard. I want to know what happens at UWI. But before we do so, let us have a word for our sponsors. Who else? The University of the West Indies.
I'm part of a tough, smart,
Constantly evolving,
never too old to learn community of human beings.
proud of country,
Proudly Caribbean, global citizens.
with convenient access to over 400 learning programs
Delivered both online and face-to-face.
from the Caribbean's University of First Choice.
My mind,
My life.
my world of possibilities is wide open.
Call, click, or visit the UWI Open Campus.
Yes, so this was what I put at Professor Waldron in terms of what is being taught to our doctors, who we, that is the society hold to very high moral standards. People are so concerned about their lives, and their lives are usually in the hands of their doctors. You spoke of confidentiality, which is very much maintained between the doctor and the patient. But that high standard that we hold doctors to, is that being at particularly UWI? I'm not saying it doesn't happen in other places, but at the University of the West Indies, which you have been part of for the greater part of your life, tell us, what is still being done? What you left there, is it still being practiced and being improved on?
Well, one of the things that I think, let me go back to when I was being trained as a doctor, and it would have been very similar to Dr. Sarenga's. We were supposed to learn ethics from our seniors and the doctors we learned with. And if that wasn't good enough, you were expected to behave well because you got into medical school. Either you were the son of a doctor, so you would pick that up from them, or you came from a good family, or perhaps you were an altar bearer in the church. There were those things that said, oh, that will be all right.
Yes.
So you didn't really have specific instruction.
Yes.
There were things that we knew you shouldn't do, and the simplest one, you shouldn't have sex with your patient. But as I said earlier on, we were also taught to deceive the patient for their own good, But we know now that we cannot do that, all right? And this is where the law will come in. But so we often say to ourselves, well, if you had all of these things, it must be the democratization of entry into medical school. Perhaps they're not coming from
the
good
social
family anymore,
backgrounds,
social background, and so on. That must be the issue. But even if you took that, they should still have their seniors to influence them. So why are we getting these complaints? Not only from the doctors, as you say, but from the members of the community. They don't seem to be acting in the same way. Well, I've worked with students for most of my professional life, and they are as bright and as dedicated and as idealistic as anybody before them were. But they are coming out into a different community, into a much changed world. They are coming out into a world that is more commercial. They're coming out into a world that has a lot more information, some of it not always very accurate, which comes across on some of the television shows. Some of the conduct on those television shows is probably quite appalling. And I don't think anybody teaches that. I think it is done for dramatic
consumption.
Yes. Right. So they're coming out into a different world. So one of the things that I realized was that the old methods of absorption of good conduct was no longer going to fit the bill. So that one of the things that I promoted before I retired and is continued is that we had to concentrate more on the ethical conduct, teaching it specifically. All right? So that's being done. But as I tried to illustrate to you earlier on, that also has to be done. It is not just behavior. They have to know about the law and the law that is going to be practiced in the particular jurisdiction they're practicing in, because that can affect how they will relate to their patients. So yes, there is now a specific
course
instruction in relation to ethics. As a matter of fact, although people say, well, if you're a surgeon, why you get involved in these things? As a matter of fact, one of the things I did just after I retired was that I thought I should write a book that could be used by medical students and the lay public, if necessary, which I entitled Ethics in Everyday Healthcare. Because quite often the ethical books that one reads and so on dealt with some of the esoteric and important issues, but it weren't the things that you met every day. You know,
it's an ethics far removed from reality.
Yes. You know, I mean, it was an important reality when it comes, but in fact, and some of them change practice, but what happens in everyday healthcare. And the other thing that was introduced, and I would like to see it introduced more widely, is that we have a very successful method of clinical teaching where we base it on the patient, the cases, and we teach very well that clinical medicine that way. And I felt that we have to use the same method for teaching ethics.
Well, you see, what you have said, Professor Waldron, is that I still view, and I think generally society view medical personnel as role models when it comes to ethical behavior. In the next 2 minutes, our program ends, can you tell me, why is ethics important? Just generally, why is ethics important?
Because it is the absolute essence of the conduct between a client and a professional, right? There are techniques and there are laws and so on in between. But if that professional-client interface breaks down, there is no service. Because if you can't trust one another, then the service is going to go wrong. You're going to go away without your problem solved, or you will, even if it is solved technically, there's a sense of dissatisfaction that is pervasive. So that's the interface that has to be
maintained. So I am so happy to hear that from you. And I'm smiling here because we made no mention of businessmen. Should there be ethical behavior? Do we view businessmen, like politicians, as professions that need ethical behavior also?
Of course, they need ethical behavior. Quite often, though, the businessman, the interface with the public is at the counter at the end of their service. Yes. But if you see the results of what goes on in business, you will realize that they need to exercise greater ethical conduct in the boardroom as well.
Yes. And again, ethical behavior is in the modern world so much governed by money. Yes. Has that shaped our professions, medicine, law,
Absolutely.
religion?
The professionals, including religion, interestingly enough, are expected to get rich quickly.
I think you could have put it a better way.
And that does shape how they conduct themselves.
Well, talking about shaping behavior, I am always so proud to be part of the UWI family. And we have had Professor Waldron here teaching UWI students and medical students. We always see as role models for our society and will continue to be so. Let me leave you here to reassure you that we will be back in the third Thursday of October, but please attend our lecture tonight at 7:30. It's going on now. Okay, we'll put that up.